This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for a special deal at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, April 16th, 2020, and my guest is Basil Kronfli. Hi, Basil, how are you?
Hey, Miriam, I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. It's always so good to hear your voice.
It's always wonderful to hear yours as well. And, I guess I'm great considering the circumstances, I suppose. We are being inundated with phones. And this is interesting because it looks like our spring phone, schedule that's usually quite mad is sticking with us. It's actually pretty busy right now, which is kind of why I feel great because, yes, I have to worry about a bunch of things as always and more than usual. But at the same time, I have a lot to keep me busy. And speaking of, we got two major phone releases this week. Both of them, actually, we knew were coming. But I think one was a little bit more of a, we don't know what date. And I'm talking about the iPhone, of course. Right?
Yeah, big time.
The OnePlus, I think we had a better, clearer idea of it coming. And I think that made it easier for us to plan. But the iPhone, I think, from what I understand from my colleagues in the US media, because I'm not that close to Apple anymore, I think that they just got told the day before or something,
I mean, I had no specifics locked down, but also it was perfect timing, and it almost feels like it was responsive based on just how good the timing was.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if that was always Apple's plan. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the rumors had been strong about the 15th or the 16th. And I didn't think the 16th would fly because Apple doesn't launch things on Thursdays. It's a bad day of the week, to do anything in terms of PR. So I figured it would be Tuesday or Wednesday. But, they obviously knew that OnePlus was doing something on Tuesday. So let's steal their thunder and launch something the next day that's half the price.
Yeah, and considering where OnePlus has come from, being such a champion of people looking for a more affordable phone, and this time not necessarily delivering in that bracket, Apple's very, very well placed to pick up.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed. The thing that I felt like I never saw that coming was the price.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I did see it coming.
Because you're amazing, Miriam.
No. Let's talk about it because you and I have both reviewed the OnePlus 8 Pro. You have done it with more of an eye on photography. And yours is more of a first impression, really, right?
Oh, yeah. It's not a full review. It's a hands-on. So I'm reviewing it for a paper in the UK called Metro and a week and a bit. So my early impression is what's up. But I have used it for about a week now as a primary phone, and I've really enjoyed my time with it.
Me too. So I had reviewed both because, they sent me both, and I wrote a review for Geekspin, where, as you know, I do sometimes review phones. And I had to, we kind of, talking to the editor-in-chief, Elena, who's been on the show as well here, her and I talked, and I said, I'm not quite sure what to do. I got two phones here. And she goes, well, why don't we do one versus the other review, And so I basically reviewed them in parallel, not as my main devices, because it's hard to review two phones and make one your main, because then you get more time with it. So I kept my SIM in my own phone, and then I decided, are you going to use those extensively, simultaneously, switch between them for everything I do for almost 2 weeks. And look, they're both great phones. That's my takeaway. Ultimately, if you look at it, you cannot go wrong with either of these phones in a vacuum. Unfortunately, we don't live in a vacuum. There's this ecosystem of other phones. And of course, here in the US, we have a whole different thing to consider, which is we have pretty evolved 5G already. So, right, it's not like you can say you don't need 5G. Absolutely. You can decide not to use it for another year or two, but it's starting to become a pretty big benefit for a lot of people. So, especially
now, if they get it where they live.
Yes. And so the coverage in the US is pretty broad on low band right now. Mm-hmm. Some networks like T-Mobile have it pretty much, I would say, in 3/4 of the places they have LTE right now. So that's a lot of country, as you know, for the US. Um, and a lot of people don't know because they don't have 5G phones, so they don't see it light up yet. But as soon as you get a 5G phone from, like OnePlus in this case, directly, or from the carriers themselves, since OnePlus is actually in the US was the first of these Chinese phone makers to strike a partnership with a carrier, and that was T-Mobile for the OnePlus 6T. And then now, they for this 8, not the 8 Pro, but the 8, they struck a deal with Verizon. So they now have 2 of the big 3 carriers, operators on board. But going back to what I was saying about the OnePlus 8 Pro versus 8, for me, the OnePlus 8 Pro is absolutely superb and phenomenal phone in its own right. You can take it independently in a vacuum and say, this is a great phone for $899 US.
Yeah.
But I have a lot more issues with the OnePlus 8. And the reason for that is, to summarize what we're going to talk to in depth, is twofold. Number one, that it is expensive. $699 US is $100 more than the 7T last year. The 7T is now $499 US. That's $200 less. And you really don't get anything more with the 8 other than 5G and, of course, the new Snapdragon chip, which is splitting hairs at this point, in my opinion. And you get a worse camera system than the 7T overall. And I really want to pick your brain about that. I know you haven't actually spent much time with the 8, but I want to hear your thoughts if you've read anything about the camera system on the 8 versus 7T. Because to me right now, there are really 2 options if you're looking at OnePlus after this Tuesday launch. One is to buy the 8 Pro, spend the money and get something that, puts Samsung on notice, and it plays with the premium flagships up there in the expensive realm, and is still cheaper than those. Or you buy the 7T and call it a day. Because the 7T is so close to the 8 other than 5G, and you get a better camera, in my opinion, on the 7T. So what do you think of all that?
Yeah, I don't understand why they zapped the telephoto. And also, I really loved the point of differentiation. Now, this might be just me because it's fundamentally, from a design point of view, doesn't make a huge amount of sense having 2 totally different devices. But the back of the OnePlus 7T is so beautiful. That blue with that Lumia-esque round camera surround. If they brought that back, and I love the screen of the 8. So the screen of the 8 is better because it's just fuller. You don't have that notch. I'm kind of over notches already. But yeah, the camera system of the 8, exactly like you said, just doesn't cut it for me.
I think what my biggest concern is that they basically kept the same setup, but they kind of crippled it. And the way they did that was, so it's the same, 48 megapixel Sony IMX586. And to be clear with our audience, we're now talking about the OnePlus 8, not the 8 Pro. So don't start typing madly because I'm not talking about the 8 Pro yet, because the 8 Pro camera is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that because you and I have also both have an Oppo Find X2 Pro. So lots of commonalities there. So the 8 has an IMX586, which is the same sensor as last year's entire 7 series. As a main
entire smartphone series.
And the entire smart mobile universe. In fact, implemented in various good and bad ways last year. Bad ways would be like the some of the gaming phones that have it, they have pretty poor performance on the camera. And then good ways are phones like the K20 Pro and K20 last year, or Xiaomi Mi 9T and T Pro. Which had that sensor and did incredible things with it. My favorite implementation of that sensor is the Honor 20 Pro of last year. Did you use that one?
I did. Beautiful.
It's unreal what Huawei was able to do with that sensor. It's almost as good as the P30 sensor.
And they didn't even have OIS on that one, if memory serves.
They do have OIS on that main sensor.
Okay, got it. I'm
pretty sure the Honor 20 Pro, not the 20, the Pro.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. I took it to Burning Man along with the P30 Pro. Those were my 2 phones for Burning Man last year. And wow, let me tell you. Anyway, we're digressing. The point I'm making is that the OnePlus 8 has the same main camera as the OnePlus 7 series, all of it, except for one thing. Nobody's noticed it. I didn't even put it in my review because it's such a minor thing. But they went from an f of 1.7 lens to an f of 1.75 lens.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't know why. Maybe maybe it's a better optical stack, has more lenses, and it's actually better, less distortion, it's clearer. I'm willing to buy that, and honestly, it's splitting hairs to have a different f-stop. But I'm still butthurt that, in principle, they made the aperture smaller by a little bit.
I am so interested. That's what you picked up on when they've whacked on a macro camera that is just so mediocre.
Obviously, I'm going one by one here, but
yeah.
I mean, tell me that, because here's the thing. I want to preface this before you go in that route, because I totally agree. It's terrible that the 7 series last year, at least the 7T and the 7T Pro, had, and maybe the 7 Pro, had a macro mode, super macro is called on OnePlus terminology, and it has this fantastic thing where it uses the ultra wide as a macro by actually having autofocus on the ultra wide. It's very much like Huawei does with the Mate 30 and the P30 and the P40, where you can do macro photography using the ultra wide because it has autofocus. So, bear with us here, audience. Think about that in the back of your head. Think about an ultra wide with autofocus and that you can do macro on. And now we switch to the 8. And Basil, what did OnePlus do?
OnePlus whacked on a low resolution macro camera that cannot handle anything but fantastic lighting.
And doesn't have autofocus.
Oh yeah, fixed focus. So it's basically an old Nokia phone with like a close-up focus. And you've got this on other cameras, like from Xiaomi, the Xiaomi Note 10, and so like an Honor had this on the Honor 20. It's never been good. It's never been something anyone's wanted. So with the like additional cameras on both the OnePlus 8 and OnePlus 8 Pro, I'm left scratching my head. It would have almost been better if neither were there, because it would have been less confusing.
Exactly. So, and then if you didn't get the memo from Basil just earlier when we were talking, because you got to be on it and listen to us carefully, he said there's no telephoto, right? So what happened is they lumped the telephoto out, which, by the way, on the 7T is a very meh telephoto. So I'm not too mad. But let's get there in a sec. But I think that they removed a telephoto and added a macro without autofocus that's 2 megapixels is terrible. And they could have just plugged the hole, had 2 cameras in there, and kept that autofocusing. It's still autofocus. The OnePlus 8 still has an ultra wide that autofocuses. I tested it. They could in software have super macro on that camera. It's the same sensor and lens as last year on the 7T, Basil.
Do you know what's so painful? And I'm going on a total tangent in terms of OnePlus, the P40 in the UK. Now, I know there's a Google story. That's a 699 device with 5G, and the camera system on the P40 is so beautiful. My dream OnePlus 8 would have had a P40 camera.
Exactly. So what I could have done here is, I understand that taking the telephoto was a cost-cutting measure, and then putting in a crappy 2 megapixel fixed focus, it has large pixels, 1.75, but that doesn't seem to help it at all in low light. The aperture is f/o 2.4. It's terrible. They went for really cheap because they wanted to plug that third hole and not make it look like they only had 2 cameras. And I don't understand this. Why not put a black and white there or something? Do something else. Even that, let's go crazy here. What about putting that weird gimmicky color filter camera from the 8 Pro?
Don't say it.
No, but they could have done that. Honestly, I would have been less butthurt by them keeping
it would
the
have
super
added
macro.
Consistency as well, rather than this totally new.
I would have been happier with them keeping the macro on the ultra wide with autofocus and put some kind of silly third camera that we'll never use, so that they can say they have 3 cameras on the back.
Frickin' call it a time of flight and we'll be done with it.
Exactly, or depth sensor like Oppo likes to do. And also, by the way, I blame Oppo for putting 2 megapixel macro cameras without autofocus on their phones as well. Oppo 2, Reno 2Z, come on, all of those. But it's just driving me nuts how much part spinning is happening here, right? like between BBK group phones. And the one thing that I have to say is better on the 8 than I expected, given that they lumped off the telephoto from the 7T, is that it actually works pretty well as a telephoto. Well, it's not a separate lens. So it works very well zooming in digitally, cropping, and doing some fancy computational photography goodness with maybe probably similar to what Pixel does, but not as advanced, of, using your hand motion to extrapolate extra data. But because it zooms really well up to about 3 times, no problem. I felt it was pretty solid, the results. So, again, I don't know how you feel about that.
I haven't tested the zooming on the 8, but it's exactly like you said. It's just looking at it and then looking at last year's. If I was a OnePlus 7T user right now, I'd be very happy, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
And that's what I said in my review. I said, unless you need 5G, absolutely need it, which you absolutely do not, even in the US where it's widespread, you do not need 5G yet. If you do not need 5G, you do not need a OnePlus 8. Buy a 7T, it's $200 less, Basil, $200 US less.
Realme. That's like the elephant in the, what the hell is this point of this phone?
The problem
room.
is Realme is not sold in the US. You can't buy it from a carrier.
No, the X50 Pro, obviously a lot of people won't want to import their phones. And also, even in the UK, they're having trouble getting it over. But around Europe now, the Realme X50 Pro for roughly £500, and that's got 5G. So if I know Realme probably won't be in the US, moot point, but...
No, but I'm on board with you. This is not just a US-centric podcast. I get it. And I would recommend, if we're going to go there, K30 Pro, K30 Pro Zoom, 5G. I mean, come on, they have versions of that, and it's going to be cheap. Like, that's not the point. The point is that it's just that they just did something stupid here. And it's just, I just can't. Nobody much wrote about it because they're like, oh yeah, they replaced, because nobody understands that the ultra wide with the autofocus is still there, Basil, and all it is software preventing it to be the macro. It's butt hurting me so hard right now.
And breathe. It's happened. You can't change it.
Can't change it. Anyway, so you get a lesser camera overall. But I have to say, the telephoto performance, quote-unquote telephoto, the visual zoom performance, I can tell that the ISP on the 865 is doing some really good work there. It is impressive what they were able to achieve with 3X. I would say it's usable up to 5X, which is incredible. And I'm saying usable as in, like, Instagram, you won't notice. Pixel people on your laptop, you will. But that, you have to admit, is really impressive. I put it side by side with the telephoto from the 8 Pro, and honestly, they held their own up to 5X.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
And I think the reason for that is because, and maybe it's time to switch to the 8 Pro camera for a second. The reason for that is that the telephoto on the 8 Pro is really pretty much the same telephoto that was on the 7 Pro and 7T Pro, which is a different telephoto. Which was never mind-blowing. Yeah, which is definitely a different telephoto than the 7T, by the way. And it's not great. It's an 8 megapixel sensor. It's it's actually not that. It's supposed to be an 8 megapixel sensor with 3x zooming, optical. But what it really is a 13 megapixel sensor with 2.2x optics. And they crop it to 8 megapixels. And the f-stop is 2.4. And but for a zoom lens, that's acceptable. And here we go. Here's the kicker. Here's the killer. 1 micron pixels. And so the end result is that in low light, up to 3x, the OnePlus 8 cropping zoom is better. Because, get this, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do a switch in the software that lets the OnePlus 8 Pro use its main sensor up to 3x in low light.
In low light, yeah.
Because, it's f of a 1.75 or whatever, and it's 48 megapixels. And let's talk about the main sensor on the 8
But
Pro,
yeah, it's not just another 48 megapixel sensor like on the 8. It's the second time we've seen Sony's new sensor.
Right. And oh, by the way, as an aside, before we go to the main sensor, the ultra wide on the 8 Pro is exactly the same sensor, the Sony IMX586, as it's the same sensor as the 7 series main sensor. And as you said, almost all of last year's Chinese phones. But
Yeah,
that's
that's amazing.
It's amazing. Actually, the ultra wide on the 8 Pro is phenomenal, I feel.
Yeah,
like it's not Mate 30 Pro, P40 Pro phenomenal, but that's because to be expected because Huawei still wins the roost here. But
plus, you're paying less for it. So in the UK, the price difference is 200 sterling.
And remember when we talk about the OnePlus 8 Pro camera here, when you hear us talk about it right now, that if you want a better camera system in terms of telephoto, you can switch up to the Oppo Find X2 Pro, which is basically the exact same camera system other than it throws out the telephoto and adds a folded 5x optical zoom lens.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that Sony IMX689 main sensor on the OnePlus 8 Pro?
Correct me if I'm wrong. My findings from the Find X2 were done with earlier software than is available now. What I loved about it on the Find X2 was largely down to Oppo's image tuning. It was so much more natural and so much more desaturated than what I'd come from, which was a Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra.
Oh my God. The Galaxy S20, the processing on that phone kills the camera.
Yeah, so you can just imagine it was like salvation coming to the Find X2 Pro. Now, I've noticed that the OnePlus saturation and processing is pumped up by comparison to the Find X2 Pro. So I preferred the Find X2 Pro, but I think actually that's really going to come down to the individual, a lot of that.
Yes, I think that's something. I don't think we can knock them for that. I think we can knock Samsung for over sharpening and over processing because it's really obvious. But I think we cannot knock OnePlus for being a different, basically, aesthetic of the output, because photography is a filter no matter what you do, right? And once you wrap your head around the fact that no two cameras are going to look the same in the same environment because of physical hardware differences, and in this case, a lot of physical software differences because we have the same sensor and the same optics. There's a lot of things that are the same between the 8 Pro and the Find X2 Pro. Like the display is the same. The haptic motor is the same. The main camera and the ultra wide are the same. It's again, hello BBK part spin specials. I'm not mad at that. I think it's fine. I just feel that it's a little too obvious sometimes what they do, Oppo and OnePlus. It's like what was the phone? One of the earlier phones, I think it was the OnePlus 5. I want to say that looked like a complete like identical almost to some Oppo K series of its time. Completely. No, or R series, like the R15 or the R4. I can't remember. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it was
anyway,
the 6T.
That's so typical. That's so typical. So to me, the camera system on the 8 Pro is pretty solid. The telephoto is last year's, and it's the only problem I have with the telephoto is the processing right now is hazy and cloudy in many circumstances. Like contrast is off and weird, and I think that's just a bug in the software. They're going to fix it. It doesn't feel weak, but it doesn't feel, it's definitely the Achilles heel of the OnePlus 8 Pro camera system, but it's not a deal breaker. It's not like. It still falls well within its, intended price point performance ratio in terms of like delivering to me. You're not going to get a periscope lens at this price point. Like, just get real, okay? Like, how much more is the X2 Pro? Like, Oppo is like.
Oh my God! Like, sorry, in the UK that's $1,099, so pounds sterling. So that's by contrast to $799 starting price. Now you do obviously get other benefits as well, like the 65-watt fast charging and the 512 gig storage, but you lose out on the warp charge, 30 wireless warp charge.
Wireless. So that's the other thing that's exciting about the 8 Pro for me. That I just want to say as an aside for the listeners who keep hearing me about what I'm still haven't solved what is going to be my next main phone dilemma, but I kind of have, because I think it's going to be a OnePlus 8 Pro. And the reason for that for me is multifold. I need stock Android-ish experience. I come from Pixel. I've been a Nexus and Pixel user up to the 3XL. I haven't made the switch to the 4. I don't know if you listened to the previous podcast, Basil, but this has been the big thorn on my side for the last 6 months since the 4 come out, is that a lot of my banking apps and other apps, my Tesla app and a bunch of other apps that I use every day that require authentication through fingerprinting, although the Tesla app only requires that when you want to do something advanced. But my point is I use a lot of apps that require fingerprint authentication. And I'm very happy with Android phones that support fingerprint authentication. And on iOS, all these apps support Face ID just fine. But of all these apps, they are maybe only 1/4 right now that support the special Face ID system on the Pixel 4.
Which for a flagship device of an operating system is crazy.
Well, it's also the fault of the developers who are banks and stuff and don't care. They're like, who uses pixels? That's like an audience of 5. We're not going to code for that. And it's actually, I can blame them a bit for being lazy, but I can also blame Google for not making an API that's completely transparent. Like Apple did. There was no change needed for Apple for things to work when developers switched to Face ID. So why couldn't Google do it? The reality is that I cannot use that phone as my main phone for that reason. Plus, I hate that forehead, that's massive forehead, and I hate the.
Plus, unless you have the XL, you won't survive until
I have the XL.
lunchtime.
I have the XL.
Okay.
Battery life was the next thing I was going to say. So I've been looking for a replacement. I've been like, should I wait for the Pixel 5 or should I just, because I'm still on my 3XL. For a little while, I had switched over to the McLaren Edition OnePlus 7T Pro, which was only sold by a carrier in the US. Which was T-Mobile, which happens to be my carrier, and was one of the first 5G phones on the network. So I actually used it with 5G for a while, which was really lovely. But, again, that phone had another issue. It had no wireless charging, which the Pixel does, and I'm used to, and I don't want to give up. So I think the OnePlus 8 Pro has solved all the riddles. It is unlocked, which is unlike the 7T Pro McLaren in the US at least, which you have to buy through carrier. So it comes with bloatware and it's locked and you can't use it abroad with another SIM, etc. And it also doesn't even have dual SIM. It's a single SIM phone. So that's all resolved by buying the unlocked 8 Pro, which has dual SIM, has 5G support for the US on my carrier, has wireless charging, and has all the goodness of the 7T Pro other than the pop-up camera, because now we lose a bit of screen real estate to the hole punch. And some people are going to be upset about that. How do you feel?
You get IP68.
Oh, you get IP68. That's a big deal too, yeah. Officially, at least. I'm pretty sure
the old one was too, but then you weren't going to say that with a selfie camera that popped out and then people would test the theory beyond measure. But yeah,
good point.
I completely agree to a degree. But like there are just so many other like black marks against the Pixel that I never would have even considered. The XL even considered it as a primary phone. The 8, like the only thing I found which was really annoying me with the 8 Pro is the edge detection. And I'm sure that's early software.
But that's a fix, right?
Yeah. I had that with the original Find X2 Pro, but then that got fixed quite quickly.
Yeah, me too. Because I got my Find X2 Pro right when it, like one of the early journalists, and I got so many updates now that it's gotten better and better. In fact, I'm about to review it for hot hardware. So, like I'm reviewing it a month late or more than a month late now, but on purpose, kind of because I wanted to wait for things to stabilize a little bit, especially since in the US it's not sold officially, right? It doesn't exist.
Yeah, interesting. I like also the fact that it's a very different characteristic phone to, even though the hardware is the same, to the OnePlus, even down to like the screen's just a lot warmer. Like they're really...
It's amazing how I have to give, despite the parts special nomenclature that I used earlier, I have to admit that Oppo definitely has its own flavor and OnePlus has its own flavor. And that's the other thing. I cannot live with the Oppo or Xiaomi UI experience. It's like
Xiaomi, yes. Oppo, I'm okay with.
It's better with Oppo, and it's minor stuff, but with OnePlus and to a greater extent, of course, with Pixel, I know I'm also going to get updates and security updates very rapidly, right?
Yeah.
And now that they're supported by US carriers, it also means that even though my 8 Pro is going to be my review unit, I'm going to switch to that. I'm not buying it from a carrier. I'm going to get better support too if something goes wrong. Like I can go into a T-Mobile store with my 8 Pro and say, hey, something's up with my SIM card, and they can look at it and go, oh yeah, here's a new SIM card. You know what I'm saying? Like whereas if I had and this doesn't matter to me because I'm a phone nerd, but I think a lot of people, it does matter that they can walk into with a phone that's unlocked that is also supported by their operator, right?
Completely.
In the US, that's a big deal because people, really, there's not a lot of stores that are independent stores like Car Warehouse or whatever. There's Best Buy, but that's it, you know?
But even here, Car Phone Warehouse, they've all shut down now. That was the first casualty of recent times. But no, like with the UK, the Find X2 is available here, but that's £1,099 sterling on a brand that you may not have heard of. The only one of my friends who'd heard of Oppo is a hi-fi nerd who heard of them like
Why?
6 years
Because you
ago.
knew about the upscaling DVD players. Yeah.
But he'd never heard of the phones. And so when you tell him there's a £1,099 phone by Oppo, he's like, I'm not going to buy that. Like, I could get an iPhone for that price.
Yeah, right.
Then I tell him how great it is, and he's like, So they've got a lot of work to do here.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So I think, look, if you are listening in the US, it's very clear. If you can afford it, buy the OnePlus 8 Pro. It will work on AT&T and T-Mobile, two of the carriers in 5G. It will work only on LTE on Verizon. And then if you are not interested in buying an 8 Pro and you want to really get the best OnePlus experience for the money, with the reduction in price to $499, the 7T, I would forego the 5G for another 6 months, year, or even year and a half, and use that phone for a little while, because the 8 is too much of a compromise on the camera front. It's a great phone in other ways, though, but it doesn't have wireless charge. It doesn't have an IP rating. It doesn't really add more than the 7T. It only only adds 5G and the Snapdragon 865, which you really don't notice much of a difference in performance, because that's another thing that OnePlus does so well is speed. Even my Pixels are never that fast ever, right? They wouldn't be, even though you think they would be optimized by Google. But look, the reality is that I'm going to switch to 8 Pro myself, and if you can afford it, get the 8 Pro, and if you can't afford it, stick to the 7T. And then, of course, the 8 is a special case. If you're on Verizon in the US, which is only millimeter 5G right now, so completely irrelevant because you have to be near a pole on a street that has multiple poles in select 5 US cities. It's more than 5, but my point is in very few downtown cores where right now you're not going to go because of coronavirus anyway. So they have a special version of the 8 for Verizon that instead of low band 5G, which is all the other versions, has that millimeter wave 5G. And they want $100 more. So instead of $699, it's $799, and it's locked to the carrier. And you still have all the camera issues. So that, again, you're better off on 4G on Verizon with an unlocked 7T. So again, the 8 is completely irrelevant. So what I want to know from you, Basil, is you're in the UK. How do you see that war, 8 versus 8 Pro, for your users?
I see it quite differently. I don't know how available the OnePlus 7 Pro is in the US, but I would actually say, go for it.
It's available. It's also discounted right now, but not quite as discounted.
So I would say the thing with the 8 that really struck me, and I felt like you didn't appreciate it maybe as much as me, when you lay it aside the 7T, the screen is so much more full.
Yes.
It's a better screen. Way less bezel. That slight curve, it's less curved than the Pro. So you don't have that edge issue I had with the Pro. Again, even though that's going to be probably fixed very soon. But irrespective, it's immersive and for watching content on. So if you're a movie buff and you are looking at the 8, I would actually look at the 7 Pro.
Okay.
Because the 7 Pro, again, you hit the nail on the head. The power on these OnePlus phones has been so great for so long. And the optimization has been fantastic. And the 7 Pro has that all-screen display with that Quad HD plus wide Quad HD resolution. Yeah,
that's right. It's a better display. It's almost the same display as the 8 Pro, although the 8 Pro is even better in terms of color calibration and stuff. But I think that you're right. It's a better display than the 7T on the 7 Pro. By all means, you have 90 hertz on both, but one's 1080p, one's 1440p. It's a good point. You make a very good point because that's also affordable. I haven't looked at the pricing on the 7 Pro in the US, but it's also being discounted right now. And I'm talking about the 4G version that's unlocked that you can buy from OnePlus, get a warranty, get support for all 3 carriers in the US. So that's pretty good. Yeah, I agree with you.
So that's really my thing. If your focus is on camera, then get the 8 Pro. Get the 7T Pro. But get the 7 sorry, their 7 Pro. So many words and numbers.
I know,
but
it's so complicated. We haven't talked much about the 7T Pro because in the US it's irrelevant. It only exists on T-Mobile and it's been completely obsoleted by the 8 Pro now.
Got it. Well, in the UK, but to be fair, you're absolutely right as well. In the UK, generally, once one is available, the predecessor stops being widely available. So and I don't know how it is in the US, but in the UK, there are quite a lot of people who are very comfortable buying phones outright, more so than they used to be. So it wouldn't be unheard of for them to just jump on Amazon.
Yeah, here it's a lot harder to convince people. My audience will buy a phone outright, no problem. They're on board. But I think that you can still buy OnePlus 6Ts here from carriers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as long as they have stock, they're going to sell them, basically. It's not like they don't care. And they give you a discount. And, because it's all rolled into your plan in some kind of weird way. And it's just like, who knows? I'm not a big player in that game. I don't like doing that. So that's why I can't talk about the OnePlus 7T Pro, because the 7T Pro here is only the McLaren edition, only 5G, only really expensive and completely obsolete by the 8 Pro now.
Big time.
In fact, I wouldn't be surprised they completely stop selling their stock until, once they run out, if they even have any stock, because that phone I think was really impossible to find because it was such a high-end phone, right? It was coveted by people, and it was like $999 or $899 US, which is the same price as an 8 Pro today. So whatever. Yeah. Let's switch to the iPhone a little bit. Because I also want to cover some news items, and we're already 35 minutes into this. Because, I think we've talked about the important things on the various differences between the 8 and the 8 Pro, especially on the camera side. And we talked about the big thing for me is wireless charging on the 8 Pro, which really makes it possible to have a daily driver as a OnePlus phone now, because I'm such a user of wireless charging. I have a pad in my Tesla. I have pads on my desk and everywhere. And I don't necessarily need the 30 watt. It's nice to have. Obviously, they sent me the charger that goes with it, but it's just nice to have. And now that I have it, I can feel like I'm not missing out on something that my Pixel did much better, right?
Yeah.
So, SE, what's your take on that? I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer, but I want to hear what you think.
So, again, in the UK, I think everything I'm going to start is going to be like in the UK. Pricing of iPhones is way worse than it is in the US. We've historically been paying a lot more. So my shock at the price is like a direct reflection of that. So we knew the iPhone SE. It's been rumored for yonks now. I don't know, John Porter at The Verge. He's been complaining about it every day for years.
That's
now,
right.
That there is no iPhone SE successor. But having said that, it's just a really, really smart move, and launching it now, even if it was always planned to launch now at this price. Also, Apple's kind of bringing back its old design in a very clever way. It knows its user very well, and that's across the spectrum of people just happy plodding along with Apple products, not having to think too hard, right through to fans who want something aspirational.
Yeah, no, I think their timing is, it's a double whammo and irony in timing for OnePlus. First of all, they totally stole the news cycle away from them. Yeah. And it sucks for OnePlus, although, we got a lot of coverage by OnePlus, of OnePlus by the media, because these phones are so critical. This is such a turning point for OnePlus right now. They're finally playing with the big leagues. Like, this is amazing, Basil. If you walk into a U.S. carrier store today, you really are going to only see three brands. You used to only see 2. You're going to see Samsung and Apple, and now you're going to see OnePlus. This is how big this deal is. Whereas before, because you have to understand, we sell LG phones. We sell other phones, but you don't see any of the Chinese. So you don't see Huawei, you don't see Oppo, you don't see Xiaomi, Vivo. Any of those, they don't exist in the US. And even at retail, they don't exist. You have to go on Amazon and import them, right? So those are outdoor. So the only thing you really have left are Sony every now and then, LG every now and then, Moto, of course. And there's a lot of Moto news coming up. Yeah. And that's it. And they're in the corner in the back. Nobody knows about them and buys them. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Sonys are too expensive. The LGs are basically, if you can't afford a Samsung, you go for an LG, right? Because they're a little cheaper and they feel like a Samsung phone. And then, you get like every now and then, if you want a good mid-range phone and you don't care about, you care about your monthly payment, because it's really not going to come down to a full upfront cost. If you walk into a carrier store, it's going to come to a monthly payment cost, and the monthly payment is going to be really low. So you're going to buy a Moto G series or something, right? And that's it in the US. That's it. And everybody buys Apple or Samsung, Apple or Samsung. Now they're going to have to, OnePlus. This is a third player. What do we do? And that's huge for the US. That's a big, big deal. And I know it's hard for people who are listening from India right now, or Australia or UK. And I don't want to negate your experiences, because I know you're a big part of this podcast, folks. But I have to look, I'm Canadian and who lives in the US, and I was born and raised in France, so I also have a French citizenship. I am all about the covering things for everyone. But there, because I live here in this crazy country, I have to look at some of these nitty-gritty things that are more specific to us, because it's kind of a weird place to be in terms of everything, but also the mobile carrier and landscape and stuff, right? Like, people don't really understand, people in the UK, how much of a duopoly it's been, and having a third player in this now is like, holy crap,
Do you think it's going to be an access point for BBK? So, when I referenced Oppo earlier with regards to the pricing and the fact that the brand is unknown, OnePlus isn't unknown here. OnePlus has been with O2 for absolutely years. OnePlus is now on EE, which is the it's the 5G network. If you think 5G, you think EE in the UK. Right. So and OnePlus was, I think it was the best or the second best selling 5G device on launch when it launched with a OnePlus 70 5G Pro, all the words. But the long and short, do you think that might enable BBK to get Realme and get Oppo over?
I think it might unlocked, sold by Amazon with a warranty and an official website in the US, yes. But carriers, it's taken 7 years, whatever it is, been now for OnePlus to get in.
Yeah. But even that, when you look at the hurdles that Huawei's having to jump through, the loops they're having to jump through, and also it was on the cards with the, was it Mate 20, and then it was off the cards. Yeah. And then there's the fact that ZTE, I don't know where ZTE is with you guys.
Well, ZTE exists. It's very much, they sell mostly low-end and mid-range phones to prepaid carriers here.
Yeah.
And VMOs.
Yeah, so there you go. Even if BBK could just get their other brands for sale, I think they would do what I think they're trying to do, and that is be the next Huawei.
I think Xiaomi needs to come in. That's the next one that needs to come in. I think BBK is already pretty happy with OnePlus and going to stick with it. OnePlus is not considered a Chinese brand here at all. People have no idea. They think of it as, another Asian company of some kind, but they don't think Chinese at all. Which is the day Trump wakes up and realizes OnePlus is Chinese, we're screwed, okay? You do understand what's going to happen next. And I hate to have to say that, but let's talk about the iPhone.
Let's do it.
If you walk in the carrier stores and you see three brands now, great, but one of them is Apple, and I think Apple nailed the SE. A lot of people are complaining. I'm having a discussion right now on Facebook with a friend of mine I used to work with in video games, and he's like, Miriam, my wife was so excited about this, and now she's so disappointed because it's 4.7-inch display and it's an iPhone 8 chassis and it's too big. And I'm like, what the F do you want? If they had kept the small chassis, say roughly the same footprint as the old SE, the 5S, the 5, and stretched the screen to the corners like like the modern phones do with bezel-less displays, we would no longer have Touch ID, we would have Face ID, and the price would be $699.
Yeah.
Look at the guts of this thing. The fact that they were able to recycle a chassis, and I think in this space they're playing with at $399 US, this is a little swan song, a final little hooray and a final thank you to those users who still don't want to use Face ID. Will eventually be dragged kicking and screaming into Face ID for the next round, but they can be happy for 3 or 4 years now with a phone that'll be top notch for them every day.
Completely. And I'd almost challenge his wife to get the phone in her hand, because I think we start looking at numbers and stop realizing how the phones actually have developed over the last few years. I know. And this is such a thin, small phone. It's so
small today. It's so small, even with its bezels. And I told him, he says, well, I have an iPhone 10. And she finds that too big. And I thought about it for a second. I was like, yeah, the iPhone 10 is just a couple of millimeters bigger than an 8. So I can understand how she'd be butthurt because they're close. But there's still, that few millimeters makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah. So what I was talking about with the exchange rate, where there's the exchange rate, and there's always been the Apple exchange rate. It starts at only £419 here.
Oh my God, that's phenomenal.
So that's not sticking with like what has happened in the past, especially after.
It's not £390. It should be £399, right?
No, oh my God, no! Like in the past, so if an iPhone had launched for $399 or sorry $499 or something in the US, it would have launched in the UK like a higher sterling price to the dollar.
Okay, so like $4.99 or $4.50 or something.
Yeah. Like there's always been such huge markup.
I thought it was one across euros and pounds and US because it
went up after Brexit.
It went up
after the referendum went haywire. Then we're already out of the EU. Then the price of all Apple products went up, and it was really, really full on. Like there have been a few things that have made it bump up. But having said that, the idea of an iPhone for £419 here in the UK is totally just,
bonkers.
Yeah.
And think about this. With an A13 Bionic in it, faster than Snapdragon 865.
Yeah, super low res screen by comparison, and that's not a dig. I mean, that's not a dig. It's to say this has minimal load on the processor. Like it's going to be able to fly.
It's going to have the same size battery which will last forever. It doesn't have 5G to worry about. I think the biggest discussion I want to have around the SE, because you and I are photo nerds, is the camera system and the choices.
Yeah.
It looks like they're using the iPhone XR XR hardware for the camera with almost all the software from the 11 cameras because of the Bionic, the 13 chip, A13 chip, and that the only thing we're going to miss out on is night mode. But I'm not clear that means that you can't, like night mode right now on the 11, you can't manually select, right? It's automatic only, right?
I don't know on the 11.
I think it kicks in by itself. You don't have an ability to set it manually. So if they say it doesn't have it, that means it's not automatically going to select, and that's a bit of a bummer. But everything else about it seems pretty solid to me.
You get OIS, you get 4K video.
Yeah, you get OIS now.
The
wow.
4K video that Apple produces.
4K 60.
60
Holy
frames,
crap.
exactly.
I know.
So I can't help but be impressed.
Wireless charging. Like which $399 Android phone, new $399 launch price. I'm not talking about discounted Galaxy S9 from 2 years ago, okay? I'm talking about a brand new Android phone today at $399 has wireless charging and a metal and glass chassis.
Which Android phone today has IP67 protection at that price?
At that price.
So you've actually got Apple for the first time at the perfectly timed time putting the value proposition together.
And the COVID-19 pandemic timing is even more perfect because a lot of people are hurting here right now. It's really bad in the US. Our economy is completely dying and people are losing their jobs. And, sometimes, yes, you're going to say, well, I'll hold off and buy a new phone later. I'm not talking about that. Imagine you drop your iPhone 11 right now and you break it and you don't have Apple Care. You need an iPhone and you came from an 11. What do?
Yeah.
I mean, you go out and buy an iPhone SE is what you do now.
Yeah, I'm completely blown away.
But I mean, I think it's great. And people are complaining about the industrial design and the reuse and recycling of designs. Apple's done this before. The original SE was so great because it was like that. It had the 6S guts in a 5S chassis, and this is the same. It's the 11 guts in a 8 chassis, and I think it's also a smart move. The number of people who want small iPhones, and I know this is not small enough for a lot of them, but I still, as you said, give it a chance. And the other thing is the number of people in the iPhone universe that do not want Face ID and still want a home button and a fingerprint sensor on it, Touch ID is staggering. I don't know about the UK, but everyone I talk here, still, what are we now, 3 generations in on the Face ID, and they still don't want it.
Yeah, I don't hear that much here. But what I do have is people who have iPhone 6s, 7s, 8s who feel like their phone now looks old and outdated after the 10 came out.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
now their phones look fresh, like all over again.
Yeah. Is
So
that an iPhone 8 or an iPhone SE? Or you just happen to see
exactly.
me, right? Yeah.
There you go. So I think actually, like, this is a kind, like a weirdly, it feels like a kind move to a lot of people, even folks who aren't ready to upgrade but are coming from a 6, 7, or 8.
Yeah, no, this is great news. I think it's going to sell like hotcakes. Which brings us to one of the news items really quickly. I know I'm not doing this in the right order, but this is going to be a big deal, when the Pixel 4a comes out in terms of competition. Here in the US, the Pixel 4a, like the Pixel phones are never big sellers, but they're, again, like OnePlus, you can buy them from some carriers and they are unlocked and officially available with a warranty. And some sort of support. It's not as good support as Apple for sure. But, Apple's support is legendary. But I think that they had a chance with the 4A. But now I'm worried that if the 4A is $399, I don't see anybody. I mean, I'm on board. I think honestly, I'm so butthurt by the 4 and 4XL that if I didn't have the OnePlus 8 Pro to switch to, I might switch to a 4A.
Yeah.
Because the camera is what I care about, and
Yeah.
the fingerprint sensor and the pixel experience, and you get all that. You don't get water resistance. You do get a headphone jack. You're probably not going to get wireless charging. If the 4A had wireless charging, I think that might be better, but I don't think that's going to happen.
But also, if the 4A carries forward the 3A's design, like it's fine, but it's fine. It's plastic. It doesn't feel special, and it's ultimately like unless it has an amazing it won't have an amazing processor. It's not going to compete with the iPhone on a power front. No. And based on pixel markup, again, devices that may not be available in the US, like from Realme, etc., you're gonna just be able to get so much more bang for your buck. I would be.
Oh, absolutely. I will recommend, I'm sure I'll be recommending the K30 series like I was recommending the K20 series last year, the Redmi, because they're so good for the money with Snapdragon 865s and last year 855s. I mean, you're right. And for those of us who are nerds and early adopters and buy phones, gray market, I think that's going to fly. But I still think there's some space in there for the 4A somehow. The fact that it has a bigger edge-to-edge display with OLED, and the camera is still going to surpass, other than video, like just talking stills, it's still going to surpass the iPhone SE.
Yeah.
So, but my point, you're right. It's not premium. It's definitely a step down. And if you're an iPhone user, you're not going to go to Android. It's more like if you're an Android user right now, and your phone breaks, and you want a brand new phone, you're going to wait for the 4A, or you're going to switch over to iPhone for a little bit. And
if I had a Pixel 3. Regular Pixel 3, I was getting totally just brain dead by the fact that my photos kept deleting themselves, and I was having terrible battery life, and ultimately between bad RAM management and whatever was going on that I didn't see, I was so turned off Pixel. I would go to an iPhone SE off the back. I would not upgrade to. Exactly. And so I think generally with Pixels, what's let them down has been the experience from Pixel to Pixel to Pixel.
Yeah.
They haven't aged well once you've had a Pixel for a long time.
Yeah, they're terrible. They slow down and they stutter and they don't have enough RAM. They always lack RAM. This, look, the reality is, I'm going to link to an article by David Raddock, the editor-in-chief of Android Police. I write there sometimes. And he wrote a really great story yesterday about how the iPhone SE is going to obliterate the Pixel 4a. And this is an Android blog, okay? I think you should read the article. It'll be in the show notes along with, my 8 versus 8 Pro OnePlus review, along with Basil's 8 Pro, digital camera world story, along with the SE stories from The Verge. The Verge did a deep dive. It was John did a deep dive on the SE2 camera. So check it out.
Oh, of course it was John.
Speaking of pixels, really quickly, is that the 4A is leaking extremely hard right now, so it should be launching really soon. And again, I think it's going to be a bust now. I was really excited about it, and I'm still excited, as a Pixel fan about it. But I just feel like it's going to get its lunch eaten by Apple. I think if I were Google right now, I would delay this by a month or two, and then try to sell it at a $50 discount out of the box. you know.
Yeah. Or just launch with a lower price.
Oh yeah, or launch right away with lower price, something like that. But speaking of lower prices, if you are a Pixel user or want to be a Pixel user or broke your Pixel and really need a Pixel right now, this is your time. Like in the US right now, this week, as we're speaking, when you get this podcast on Saturday, you're going to be able to buy a Pixel 3a for $299 US and a Pixel 4, the base 4, for $499. Which I still wouldn't buy the Pixel 4 at that price, in my opinion. It's 6 months old. It's also the small one, the battery life, blah, blah, blah. But it's a good deal considering the original price. But then you consider that the original price was terribly expensive for what it was, and it's not a good deal. Buy the 3A. If you need a backup phone right now, and you're an Android lover, and you somehow really like pure Android and the camera is important, and you don't care about plastic and all that, the 3A for $299 is insane.
Yeah, and I agree. And like, I'm coming from a very, very spoilt frame of reference. Obviously, I'm coming from like,
we both.
I think, like a periscope camera, like a P30 Pro I was using before. And so like, you will compromise. But here's the thing. In the UK, you can get a P30 Pro for not that dissimilar a price. So getting a P30 Pro right now is such a smart move because you've still got Google services, and so it's not going to be like this in all markets. But that periscope camera, the fact that when you, unlike with the Pixel 3a, want to take a portrait shot, it's not super crusty when you creep into it because it's actually got decent resolution behind it, etc. So I see compromises when I use a Pixel that I didn't used to see when I use a Pixel. So when the Pixel 3 launched,
I agree. It's a challenge. Man, it's so hard. Speaking of Huawei, let's go through our news items real quick. There's a few. I kind of want your hot takes on these real quick. Honor 30 series. The Honor 30s launched. There's three. There's a 30, a 30 Pro, and a 30 Pro Plus. And the 30 Pro and particularly the 30 Pro Plus, looks to me like a Huawei P40 non-Pro competitor. Typical Honor. They do this. They come out with the P series, and then 3 months later or 1 month later, they come out with the Honor 30 Pro, which always seems to be like a revisit of the P series.
I mean, this was hot out the gate. Like, this really was. Like, I don't remember a time it's been just this obvious.
Yeah, so just to fill you in, audience, read the thing, linked to an Android Police story where they cover all the models. The takeaway is that the Honor 30 Pro Plus has the 50 megapixel RYYB sensor from the P40 Pro, the same main sensor. And everything else looks very damn similar too.
Yeah.
Not to the Pro, not the P40 Pro, but the P40.
Yeah, it does.
And then the Honor 30 Pro non-Plus is basically a copy of the P30 Pro with the 40 megapixel RYYB sensor from last year.
Yeah, now the P40 and like P40 Plus P40 Pro is still the superior phone when you look at the additional modules, camera modules.
For sure.
But having said that, like, I think from the design language even just feels that bit more similar this time round. It feels less Honor.
And the front display with that cutout, the oval hole punch and the waterfall sides, it's missing the waterfall top and bottom, but we're very close
which
here.
I love so much. Like,
It's
so when you
nice.
were talking earlier about your daily driver, I've got Google Apps on my P40 Pro and I'm running with that. And
so
like
wait, did you, because I heard that we can't get notifications working still.
I have, I have a version of Google Apps working, and I've had that for the last 48 hours.
There is some hacks, but unlike the previous, like the Mate 30 and the P30,
it isn't seamless. I can't get my business account on there.
There is a lot of issues with that pack, so I'm reluctant to go there right now.
Yeah, so
I use so many Google apps that I really need their notification system to work.
No. So I've set I think maybe I've set my notifications with Outlook for my email because it's Google Apps, and you can't put Google Apps accounts on there anyway with the hack. So yes, but back to the Honor 30 Pro, I really want to get these in my hands to like actually see if they are as like obviously similar as they look in renders.
Yeah, me too. It'd be really interesting. I kind of, a lot of people find it's a little gaudy, but I like the big Honor etched in the glass in the back. It's kind of cool. Like, I get it.
It's fun. They've got that really geometric typeface as well. I don't hate it for another kind of user. Like, I wouldn't love it if it was my phone, but it definitely has a place.
It has a place. I 100% agree. So I'll link to it. Check it out. Then we have the Oppo Reno Ace 2, which is a Snapdragon 865 flagship from Oppo, which is not a flagship like the Oppo Find X2 Pro, not quite as expensive. But it has the fastest wireless charging in the world, 40 watt, plus the fastest wired charging in the world at 65 watt. So, Oppo, you're strange.
Do you not love that round camera surround?
Oh, it's nice.
Just so pretty. Yeah, so the Ace was available in China only. It never launched Europe-wide. I may have launched in other parts of Asia. And there was that awesome Gundam edition. I don't know if you saw it, of the Ace as well.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And so like that had I think that introduced the 65 watt wired charging. And then they introduced that phone with no ports or buttons, the concept phone that introduced the super fast wireless charging. And this kind of brings them together. Yep,
basically. It's interesting how the Oppo does this so incrementally. Look, I'm on board. A Snapdragon 865 phone with 5G for, $600 or so, whatever it is. With, fast wireless charging and fast wired charging and some decent looking cameras. Yeah, sure. Sign me up. That's what I love about these Chinese phones in general. Oh, it has a 90 hertz display too.
Yeah.
There you go.
But I don't think I don't know if Ace is going to launch anywhere outside China. So that's just worth
well,
bearing
that's
in
right.
mind.
We don't know right now. Yes, for sure. Well, anyway, speaking of LG, we talked about them earlier, and I said that they're pretty much the replacement for Samsung if you can't afford Samsung in the US. I reviewed the LG V60 a while back. If you've been listening, audience, you know this. And it has a lot of compromises there, but the price is pretty decent, although now OnePlus is eating their lunch, obviously. They have decided not to do a G series this year, and we heard the rumors and talked about it last week or the week before. But this week, we found out that their replacement for the G series is going to be called the Velvet line, LG Velvet, and it's very design centric. It looks pretty, right? At least in the renders we saw.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Snapdragon 765G 5G, which is exactly what I think LG should be doing. One of the lines in my LG V60 ThinQ 5G review, yes, I know it's a mouthful, was that LG really needs to make a OnePlus priced competitor, like a $600, $700, $600 mid-range-ish phone, like premium, flagshipy, but maybe not with the 865,
Has LG got legs in the US?
Well, they still do because of carriers. So they could, it's not a huge amount. Like, it's not people's first choice, but it's often a fallback choice. And then end up being pretty happy with it overall. You know what I'm saying? It's not that they're bad phones.
No, they're not.
It's just they're a little compromised,
And like the V series is just like when it launched, the V30 was just like, well, obviously you had ones earlier.
Oh, this was a different universe back then.
Yeah.
The original V30 was one of my favorite phones. It was such an amazing phone.
It launched at IFA. And so a friend's had that and he's been so happy. And he actually went to a Huawei after that and was like, I miss my LG, which is like, what? But LG in the UK, I think they've just lost a little bit too much footing. The only reason they survive here is because they're in bed with the carriers from years and years of really in-depth in bed with the carriers, and they basically make bespoke phones carrier spec'd. They do not try to compete with Samsung directly anymore. They used to, but now they're literally saying, okay, Verizon, what do you need? Okay, we'll make that. No problem. And there's a place for that. And if they do it well, good for them. And like I saw everything like with was it the V60 that you reviewed? The response to that's been really, really solid. The price is
because $800 for a 5G phone that you can buy on any carrier, and it's not a bad deal. It's still cheaper than it's basically the same price as the decked out version of the OnePlus 8. Mm-hmm. So, but you get a much bigger screen, and you get wireless charging, which you don't get on the 8, and you get IP resistance, which you don't get on the 8, and you get a headphone jack that you don't get on the 8. So, there are some things about it. But then, it falls apart because there's no telephoto, and you get a 60 hertz display at 1080p, 6.8 inches. Ouch.
But then there's the software experience as well.
And then there's LG's software experience, Speaking of flagships, Moto is finally officially said that they're launching a flagship on April 22nd, or maybe a couple of flagships. So stay tuned for that, right? That's basically all I was going to say. Speaking of as well, I have them in hand. Now I can talk about them. The embargo lifted, and I don't have time to talk about them, but I have the Moto G series. I have the G Power and the G Stylus. If you need questions answered about that on Twitter, please ping me. I have the phones. I will talk about them more extensively next week. The embargo is lifted as of today. They're finally available. You can buy them now in the US. It's a big deal in the US, the G series. It's basically the closest you can get to a Pixel A series phone, right? Because it's so pure Android. That works on all carriers in the US and is a really decent experience overall. You know what I'm saying?
So do you not have Nokia in the US?
We do, but they're not remotely in the same league as Moto G in that world. They compete, of course, but nobody remembers Nokia. For better or for worse. And that's basically it in terms of the news. Oh, RedMagic 5G, really quickly. This we kind of touched on it in the past in the show. There were rumors. Now it's official. It's a $650 phone US, which is about $150 more than the previous RedMagic 3 phone from Nubia. This is a gaming phone, folks. I reviewed the RedMagic 3 for Android Police really briefly. I reviewed it from the perspective of a non-gamer. I was like, if you want like the best Snapdragon you can get and the best speed you can get today, but you don't play games, would this be an okay daily driver? That was my perspective, right? And so I'm getting a RedMagic 5G at some point soon, and I'll talk about it more. But the thing about this phone that's interesting is that it still is the cheapest Snapdragon 865 US priced phone on the market at $650 and has 5G. And of course, it makes some sacrifices. No wireless charging. It has a fan in it, so don't drop it in the toilet. It has, it's big and it has triggers. It's a gaming phone, okay? But maybe the camera is a little better. Last year I had a Sony IMX586 and it had one of the worst implementations.
It sucked so bad.
It was so bad. I'm like, how can you screw up so bad with this sensor? It's such a good sensor, but apparently you can. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, that floored me because they actually wangled so many beta elements within that software, by putting 8K video on. I don't know if you remember.
Right.
They put 8K video in
God,
the most janky beta format, but it couldn't even take a good picture. But hey.
It's so funny. Well, RedMagic is a bit of weird acquired taste. At least they officially sell in the US. You can buy one with a warranty that works on our networks. This is exciting. Nice. Speaking of Chinese companies coming to the US, well, Nubia is doing a better job than Oppo and Xiaomi. So there you go. So that's it for the show. That's it for the news. That's it for everything. I know we've gone on and on and on because we're nerds. But Basil, you want to tell the audience where they can find you on the internet? Because I know you write in a bunch of different places and I don't want to screw that up.
Okay, so I write for titles like Wired and TechRadar and Stuff Magazine, and in the UK newspaper called Metro. I'm on Twitter, Basil_knows, as in know something, not nose on my face.
That's right, nose with a K.
Yes. I also have all the phones I review on Instagram on Let's Talk About Tech. So if you hit me up there, then you can also ask any questions about phones that are maybe a bit more UK-centric.
You should follow Basil. Really good writing. A big photo person like me. If you like camera phones, here's another awesome person to follow. In general, another awesome person to follow. But camera phones are something that we are both, you and I, super excited about, right?
Big time. And Miriam and I go back crazy 10 years or something. So
yeah, it's been forever. You folks know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl, that's TNKGRL, on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find my ramblings there on Twitter. Mostly, Twitter is a good vehicle for you to discuss a podcast. If you have questions about the Moto G series, ask me on Twitter. And then Instagram is a good place to see photos of phones that I'm reviewing, photos taken with phones I'm reviewing. Tankgirl, like the comic book, Drop the Vowels. That's how it works. There's also a YouTube channel for this podcast called, of course, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. Lots of videos there, unboxings primarily, but some hands-on videos, some review videos. If you want some visual content for this podcast and you want to watch stuff while you listen to the podcast, maybe check out the YouTube channel as well. Of course, I would recommend you subscribe to the channel and tell your friends and all that good stuff. Comment and click the notification bell. And then subscribe to the podcast as well. If you landed here by accident, or maybe you follow Basil and you decide, hey, let's check this out, please subscribe. mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL. We're also on all the big platforms. So like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, which is a great app for Android, and Spotify and other places. And remember, if you get the opportunity in whatever platform you're using to rate the podcast or review the podcast, please do. It really helps us along. And speaking of helping along, please consider donating. There's a donate link in the show notes, and we could really use your help. We, meaning me and my guests. It takes a lot of work to do this every week, and I really want to be able to continue. So your help is really appreciated. And finally, I also want to say thank you to our sponsor, Audible, because without them, we couldn't do this. They help as well. And you can help by going to Audible's link I'm going to give you in a minute and joining Audible. So here's how it works. Audible, if you don't know, is an incredibly awesome audiobook platform. If you're a bookworm, you like books, for whatever reason you cannot read them on paper, on a Kindle or something on a display, because maybe you're driving, like you're a delivery driver or something, you can listen to books instead. And Audible is your best bet for that. They're a really great platform. They have a ton of selection, great books, all the major books, everything you want. And more importantly, a lot of them are read by the author, which is really great because you kind of get that really immersive experience of listening to the person who wrote the book. And so I would recommend, if you are not already an Audible subscriber, to help the podcast out, because what you can do is click on a link and support the podcast. And the best thing is you get 30-day free trial. You get to keep one of the books you download at the end, and you help the podcast, whether you stay or not. So consider it. The URL is audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Please consider joining Audible and helping us out, helping out the show. We can use your help, so please do. And thank you, Audible, for being our sponsor forever now. And Basil, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maria.
We'll have you on again at some point. So please tune in and come back next week. We'll have another guest. And until then, cheers, everybody.
Bye.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.